January 24th, 1945. Somewhere in the forests of Belgium. The thudding of boots on snow echoes in the cold silence. Snowflakes drift lazily from the grey sky as a line of weary German POW women march forward, their faces gaunt and hollow, skin stretched taut over bones. Each step is a struggle against exhaustion, their breath visible in the cold air. The silence is shattered by the crackle of a radio call from Sergeant Thomas Richards, his voice sharp and urgent as he relays the sighting of the enemy column. There's no time to wonder why these women, prisoners of war, are here, but the moment they come into view, something shifts in Richards. His hand tightens on the rifle, but his eyes lock onto theirs. No sign of the brutality he expected, just the raw, unspoken desperation of survival. This wasn't a combat mission. It was something else entirely. January 24th, 1945. 10:32 a.m. Behind American lines, a group of soldiers stand watch near the Belgian border. The air is frigid, the ground beneath them caked in mud and ice. Overhead, the sky remains an endless grey canvas, heavy with the promise of more snow. Sergeant Thomas Richards, a seasoned veteran of the European theatre with the 99th Infantry Division, adjusts his M1 Garand rifle. The war had been brutal. Constant battles through the Ardennes, critical shortages of ammunition and rations, losses that mounted with each passing week. But today felt different. The sound of marching, faint at first, soon becomes undeniable. The rhythm is uneven, broken by stumbling steps and the sharp commands of German officers. POWs, German women, malnourished and half-frozen, forced to march under armed escort through territory that had changed hands 3 times in as many weeks. The officers with them seem indifferent to their suffering, their faces hard and expressionless. Richard's orders are simple: capture and process any enemy personnel encountered. But his gut tells him this is something more than a routine engagement. As the line of women reaches the checkpoint, he surveys their faces through the falling snow, noting how they've been broken by the march. Their uniforms are torn and inadequate for the cold. Several wear civilian clothing beneath their military overcoats. One woman's boots are wrapped in rags where the leather has split. The stark contrast between the women's frail forms and the hardened American soldiers stirs something in Richards. He's been a soldier long enough to know that war strips you of humanity, reduces everything to orders and survival. But this is something else entirely. A faint murmur among the soldiers ripples through the ranks. They had expected starvation, brutality, and defeat from the Germans, certainly. But the women's hollow eyes tell a different story, not of hatred or resistance, but of something far more fundamental. Pure exhaustion. Richards shifts his weight, uneasy, the snow crunching beneath his boots. He knows the situation is far from what they anticipated when the radio crackled with reports of an enemy column approaching. Private First Class James Mallory stands beside him, his Thompson submachine gun held loosely, but ready. Mallory's jaw is tight, his eyes scanning the prisoners with the wariness of a man who has seen too many ambushes, too many tricks. The German officers, 2 Wehrmacht lieutenants, raise their hands in surrender as they approach. Their faces show the same exhaustion as the women they've been escorting. One of them calls out in broken English, something about requesting humanitarian consideration under the Geneva Convention. Richards doesn't respond immediately. He's watching the women, counting them. 43 in total. Ages ranging from perhaps 19 to 45. All of them swaying on their feet. The group of POW women is marched into an abandoned farmhouse approximately 2 kilometers behind the American lines. It's not much. A stone structure with a partially collapsed roof, empty of furniture, cold as a tomb. The smell of dust and mildew fills the air, mixing with the sharper scent of wet wool and unwashed bodies. The soldiers surround them, weapons drawn, eyes wary and calculating. The women shuffle in, silent and broken, their movements automatic and devoid of resistance. The tension in the room thickens immediately. One soldier, Private Mallory, mutters something under his breath about the prisoners being nothing but a burden, another mouth to feed when their own rations are already stretched thin. His voice betrays the hardened anger of a man who had seen his best friend killed by a German sniper just 3 days earlier. But Richards doesn't reply. He watches the women, their eyes darting nervously between the soldiers, looking for threats, for violence, for whatever comes next. They've learned to expect the worst. One woman, her hair matted with ice and grime, her face hollow with starvation, stumbles as she crosses the threshold. Her legs simply give out, and she falls to her knees on the stone floor. The sound echoes in the empty space. The soldiers stand still, unsure of how to act, their training inadequate for this particular scenario. No one moves to help. Not at first. Richard stares at her, frozen for a moment by the sheer human fragility of the scene. His hand twitches at his side, hovering between instinct and humanity, between the soldier's reflex and the man's conscience. When the soldier nearest to the woman, Corporal Danny Chen, makes a move to drag her back to her feet roughly, Richard's voice cuts through the tension, low but firm and carrying the weight of command. Let her be. The decision comes unexpectedly, and it's not the action of a soldier following protocol. It's the act of a man witnessing the rawness of war, of suffering that's gone beyond the battlefield, beyond tactics and strategy. There's no triumph here, no victory to celebrate, only the hollow echoes of desperation and the quiet sound of the woman's labored breathing. Chen steps back, uncertain. The other soldiers exchange glances. Richards moves forward slowly, kneeling beside the fallen woman. He doesn't touch her, doesn't speak, just waits until she catches her breath, until she can raise her head and look at him. When she does, her eyes are blue and startlingly clear despite the exhaustion. She expects violence. Instead, Richards stands and steps back, giving her space. The farmhouse is cold, the temperature inside barely different from the winter air outside. The wind whistles through gaps in the stonework. Outside, the snow continues to fall steadily, the world covered in a layer of stillness that muffles sound and creates an eerie sense of isolation. Inside, the soldiers wait, unsure of their next move, their breath visible in clouds. The women are silent now, huddled in corners and along the walls, hands clasped in their laps or tucked under their arms for warmth. They look far older than their years, aged by deprivation and fear. Richards can't shake the unease gnawing at him, a feeling that sits in his stomach like a stone. He moves toward one of the women, a younger one, barely in her 20s, with dark hair and sunken cheeks, and looks into her eyes. What does she see when she looks at him? An enemy? A liberator? Or just another man who will take what's left of her dignity and humanity? The radio crackles again, bringing them all back to the reality of war and command structure. Static fills the air, then a voice. Battalion headquarters requesting status update and confirmation of prisoner count. Orders come down through the interference. Secure the prisoners. Prepare for transport to the rear area processing center near Malmedy. But Richards doesn't move immediately to comply. The other soldiers are focused on logistics, on their next step, on following the chain of command. Mallory is already checking his map, plotting the route. But Richards stays where he is, his gaze fixed on the women. There's something not right about how they've been treated, something that violates the basic codes he was raised with. They've been starved, beaten by circumstance, if not by hand, and forced to march through a blizzard in inadequate clothing. Yet they stand here without anger or hate visible in their expressions, just resignation and weariness. He realizes then that what they need isn't a soldier's command or a prisoner processing form. It's something more fundamental, something the war has made him forget exists. Basic human decency, the recognition that suffering has a limit beyond which military necessity becomes cruelty. Richards makes a decision that isn't in the manual, isn't covered by the Geneva Convention articles he memorized. He decides to see them as people first. January 24th, 1945. 1:03 p.m. Inside the farmhouse, Richards breaks the silence by moving toward the corner where the soldiers have stacked their equipment and rations. He pulls out several K-ration boxes and his canteen of water. The women watch him with quiet, wary eyes, tracking his every movement. It's a simple act, offering sustenance to prisoners, but it's also an act of defiance in its own way, defying the violence they've faced, defying the dehumanization that war encourages, defying the voice in his own head that says they're the enemy. Richard slides the first ration box toward the nearest woman, the one who had fallen earlier. She stares at it for a long moment, uncomprehending. Another woman, older with grey streaking her dark hair, reaches out slowly, her hand trembling. She picks up the box as if it might disappear. Another woman follows her lead, then another. Richards watches them, each bite, each hesitant motion, each tear that slides down weathered cheeks. The actions say more than words ever could about what they've endured. The rations are meagre by American standards. Crackers, canned meat, a chocolate bar, instant coffee. But they are nourishment, and more importantly, they are freely given. The women eat quietly, their hands trembling as they break off pieces of hardtack and force themselves to eat slowly. Several are crying silently. One woman tries to save half her ration, tucking it into her coat pocket for later. For a moment, the tension in the room lifts, if only briefly. The soldiers are still on edge, still unsure of what to do with this situation that training never covered. But there's something shifting in Richards, a recognition forming. He knows what the orders say, what military protocol demands, but he can't reconcile that with what he's seeing before him. These aren't just prisoners of war, enemy combatants to be processed and moved. They're people, human beings who have survived something terrible, just like anyone else who's made it this far into this war. The moment stretches longer than expected, filled only with the sounds of careful eating and quiet breathing. Finally, Richard speaks, his voice low but clear enough for his men to hear. "Get them something warm. Soup if we have it. It's the least we can do." Richards leans against the cold stone wall of the farmhouse, his back pressed to the rough surface. His breath comes steady as he watches the women slowly recover some small measure of strength. Private Chen has managed to start a fire in the old hearth, and Corporal Mike Sullivan is heating water in their mess kit, adding beef bouillon cubes and whatever vegetables remain from their field rations. The scent of the makeshift stew fills the air, a meager attempt to provide warmth, but meaningful nonetheless. As the women eat spoonfuls of the hot liquid, cupping the metal cups in both hands to absorb the heat, Richard's mind drifts despite his efforts to stay present. Memories of his own family flicker unbidden in his consciousness. A younger version of himself, maybe 12 years old, sitting at the dinner table in their house in rural Pennsylvania. His sister across from him, his mother's voice ringing in his ears, as she talked about the importance of kindness, of seeing the humanity in others, regardless of circumstances or differences. "We're all just people trying to make it through," she used to say, her hands busy with cooking or mending. "Don't ever forget that, Tommy. Don't let anything make you forget. He pushes the memory aside quickly, focusing on the present moment. The war has taught him that sentiment can be dangerous, that attachment creates vulnerability. But the thoughts remain with him anyway, lingering like the warmth of the stew that's brought some colour back to the women's faces. One of them, a woman with blonde hair and a scar across her left cheek, looks up at him and nods once. Not quite gratitude, not quite acknowledgement, just recognition. He nods back. January 24th, 1945. 4:22 p.m. As night falls early in the winter sky, Richards and his men sit around the farmhouse in a rough circle, their voices low as they discuss what to do next. The snowstorm has worsened considerably, visibility dropping to less than 50 meters. Wind howls around the stone walls. They are miles behind what was the front line yesterday, though in the fluid situation following the Battle of the Bulge, lines have become suggestions rather than certainties. The orders are clear enough. Continue the mission, deliver prisoners to the nearest processing center, return to unit. But Richards feels the weight of his decision pressing down on him like the snow accumulating on the roof. He's not sure if he's doing the right thing, but what choice does he have? Should they send the women out into the storm to march another 10 kilometers to the nearest camp? Or should they stay here, protected under their watch for just a bit longer? Mallory speaks up, his voice rough. "Sarge, we've got orders. Battalion's expecting us to deliver these POWs by 1800 hours. He taps his watch. That was supposed to be 90 minutes from now. We're already late on the report. Richards turns to his men, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. We're not sending them off in this storm. Not like this. Look at them. Half of them won't make it another kilometer in these conditions. We'll keep them here until the roads are clear and the storm passes." The soldiers exchange uneasy glances. Chen looks uncertain. Sullivan nods slowly. Mallory's jaw tightens, but he doesn't argue. They knew Richards was different. He never followed orders blindly without considering the human cost. He questioned. He felt. He led with compassion when circumstances allowed. But that compassion comes at a cost, and they all know it. Disobeying a direct order, even for humanitarian reasons, can mean court-martial. Later that evening, as the farmhouse fills with the sound of men talking in low voices and women resting against the walls, wrapped in whatever blankets and coats the soldiers could spare, Richard stands by the one intact window. He looks out into the storm, watching the snow swirl in the darkness. His breath fogs up the glass, obscuring his view. For the first time in months, he feels something that isn't just survival or duty or the grinding necessity of following orders and staying alive. It's the sense that he's doing what's right, acting according to a moral compass that the war has tried to break. The enemy isn't always who you expect it to be. Sometimes the real battle is against your own humanity, against the part of you that wants to stop caring, to stop seeing individuals and see only categories. Enemy, friendly, civilian, combatant. And right now, that battle seems worth fighting, even if it costs him. Outside, the wind carries the sound of distant artillery, the war continuing somewhere beyond the storm. Inside, one of the women begins to hum quietly, a melody he doesn't recognize. Another joins her. The sound is hauntingly beautiful in the cold silence. January 25th, 1945. Morning. The storm clears just after dawn, leaving the world covered in fresh snow that reflects the weak sunlight. The women are to be transported to a larger POW processing facility near Liège, according to new orders that came through on the radio at 0600 hours. But Richards knows that this won't be easy for them. They've already been through so much, pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. His men are already preparing for the journey, checking the trucks they've requisitioned. ensuring the engines will start in the cold. But Richards lingers in the farmhouse for a moment longer, looking over the women who've managed to survive the impossible. They're standing now, moving slowly, preparing themselves mentally for whatever comes next. There's no victory here, only the realization that survival doesn't always come with triumph or relief. Sometimes survival is just the absence of death, nothing more. The woman with the scar catches his eye again. She says something in German, too quiet for him to hear clearly. He doesn't speak the language well enough to understand anyway, but he nods, and she nods back. Some communication transcends words. January 25th, 1945. Afternoon. As the women are prepared for transport, lined up beside the trucks with their meagre possessions, Richards notices something unusual. One of them, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a makeshift braid and bright blue eyes that seemed too alert for someone in her condition, is carrying something hidden under her coat. The bulge is small, but noticeable now that he's looking. He stops her, his hand firm but gentle on her arm, halting her movement toward the truck. "What's that?" He gestures to her coat. She hesitates, her eyes darting to the other guards, calculating risks and outcomes. Then slowly, with trembling fingers, she pulls out a small makeshift journal. The cover is fashioned from cardboard, the pages inside a mixture of whatever paper she could find. German military forms, torn book pages, scraps of newspaper. It's bound together with string. Richards takes it from her carefully, aware that he's holding something precious. He flips through the pages, seeing her handwriting scrawled across the paper in cramped lines. German words he can't read, but the intent is clear. She's been keeping track of her survival, her thoughts, her fears, her memories, the names of others who didn't make it, dates and places, a record of humanity persisting against erasure. Richards reads what few words he recognizes: München, Mutter, hunger, Kälte, before closing the book carefully and looking back at her. Her eyes are wide, afraid he'll confiscate it or destroy it. Instead, he hands it back to her, pressing it into her hands. "You're not just survivors," he murmurs, more to himself than to her. "You're still living." She doesn't understand his English, but she understands the gesture. She clutches the journal to her chest and nods once, fiercely. Then she climbs into the truck. January 26th, 1945. Morning. The convoy is ready to move. 3 trucks lined with benches and covered with canvas tarps. The snow-covered roads lie ahead, rutted and dangerous but passable now that the storm has cleared. But the decision still weighs on Richards like a physical burden. Should they release the women to the POW processing camp as ordered, where they'll be documented, questioned, and eventually moved to a permanent facility, or should he take them further to safety beyond the immediate war zone? The soldiers prepare their gear, checking ammunition and fuel levels. Mallory is driving the lead truck. Sullivan and Chen will ride in back with half the prisoners, but Richard stands still for a moment longer, his hand resting on the hood of the second truck. He knows that the answer lies not in orders or military strategy or what battalion command expects. The answer lies in the humanity of the situation, in recognizing that these women have already suffered enough, that whatever intelligence they might provide, whatever military value they might have as prisoners, is outweighed by their value as human beings who deserve mercy. The war will continue with or without this decision, but he can control this one moment, this one choice. He makes it. January 26th, 1945, afternoon. Richards makes his decision final. The convoy turns at the crossroads, not toward the POW processing camp at Malmedy, but toward the Allied lines further west, toward areas more secure and where medical facilities can provide proper care. He looks back at the women through the canvas opening of the truck. Their eyes are filled with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. They've learned not to trust too easily, not to assume safety until it's proven. He doesn't know what the future holds for them, whether they'll be reunited with families or face years in detention. He doesn't know if he'll face disciplinary action for altering his orders, but for now, in this moment, they are safe. The trucks rumble along the frozen road. In the distance, church bells ring in a liberated village. The sound carries across the snow. January 28th, 1945. Days later, Richards and his men return to their battalion headquarters near Bastogne. The POW women are gone, delivered to a medical facility run by the International Red Cross. Richards filed his report, documenting the encounter and his decisions with as much accuracy as he could manage. The war still rages on. The Germans are in retreat but fighting fiercely. The casualties mount daily, and the final push toward Germany looms ahead. But something inside Richards has changed fundamentally. The mission was a success in its own way. Survival and kindness overcoming the brutality of war. Human decency asserting itself against the machinery of conflict. It wasn't a victory with medals or commendations or cheers from grateful crowds, but it was a victory nonetheless, measured not in territory taken or enemies killed, but in lives preserved, in humanity maintained. His commanding officer reviewed the report without comment, then filed it away. No court-martial came, no reprimand, just silence, and then new orders. February 1st, 1945. In the quiet aftermath of battle, as Richard sits by a fire in the ruins of another Belgian town, he reflects on what happened. The flames dance in the darkness, casting shadows across his face. He'll never forget the women, their faces, their eyes, the way they looked at him as if he were the last thread of hope in a world that had forgotten them. He knew they weren't the only ones who'd suffered, who'd been ground down by the war machine. Millions had endured worse, and millions more would suffer before this was over. The war wasn't over, wouldn't be over for months yet. But for those few days in January, it had been something else entirely. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is humanity. That the choice to be kind, to be merciful, still exists even when orders say otherwise. He pulls out a photograph from his pocket, creased and worn. His family, taken before he shipped out. His mother would be proud, he thinks. She'd understand why he did what he did. The fire crackles, and somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbles. The war continues. But so does he.